Hello everybody, welcome. I'm Fiona Tomley. I'm the director of the CSIRO One Health Poultry Hub, which is funded by UK Research and Innovation. And welcome, this is the 8th panel in our roadmap series on discussions for the future of poultry, people and planet. These discussions address key issues for sustainable development from the perspective of nutrition security and the global poultry industry. So we're aiming through this series to contribute to the UN call that we build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic for the future we want. The usual housekeeping notes, today's discussion and panel will last for 1 hour. The event is being recorded and will be available on the One Health Poultry Hub website shortly after the event. Please do put your questions to the panel using the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screens. Feel free to vote for questions that you think are particularly interesting, because that will put them higher up the list and more likely to get our attention. If English is not your first language, don't let this stop you from asking questions. We're happy to take questions however you want to put them in. I will put as many of your questions as possible to our panelists. If your question is covered in a previous answer, or if we run out of time, then please accept my apologies. The questions will then go onto our online discussion channel, which you can access from our website and from your registration link. And you can explore this to share questions, comments, thoughts. There's also some literature up there that our panelists have recommended if you want to read further on the topic of today's discussion. And the online discussions that we have will contribute to a series of briefing notes that we are preparing from this series. So today's discussion is on food systems, prioritising people or poultry. And before I introduce our panelists, I'd welcome your thoughts on our first poll, which I think is coming onto the screen now, and it will disappear once you vote. So the question here is, around about 51 million cubic kilometres of habitable land on the planet is primarily used for agriculture. What percentage of this land do you think is used to raise livestock and to grow crops for animal feed? Do you think it's 77%, 50%, or 23%? So if you could just vote on that, we'd be very grateful. So it's now my pleasure to invite our expert panelists for today. So we have Professor Mario Herrero, who is the Chief Research Scientist of Agriculture and Food at CSIRO Australia. Welcome, Mario. Thank you for joining us. And the other is a very familiar face to our regular attendees at these roadmap series. It's a great pleasure to welcome Professor Robyn Alders, who's a Senior Consulting Fellow with the Global Health Programme at Chatham House, and who's normally sitting in my seat, but today she's gone across the stage and is going to be presenting. As you know, rules of engagement, you've each got a 10-minute presentation to give out your thoughts, and we'll give you a signal at 9 minutes so that you have a minute to wrap up. So with no further ado, I'm going to invite Mario to give the first talk.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Okay, that's great. Okay, so thanks a lot for this invitation. Today I'm going to talk to you about sustainable food systems. How do we prioritize people, poultry, and the planet? And I think that to start with this topic, I think that it's essential to see that we now have an absolute global convergence on the need for more sustainable food systems. From the IPCC Climate Change and Land Report, which was ratified by all governments in plenary at the end of last year, all the way to the Eat Lancet Commission, the state of food security in the world, and a range of other reports. I mentioned the Climate Change and Land report because it's the first time that that all governments ratify that it is extremely important to deal with food, both from the supply and the demand, and that has been ratified in public. Now, where does poultry sit in all of this conundrum? Well, let's talk a little bit about the future of poultry and also what's been happening in the last 25 years or so. So the demand for poultry has been increasing at an accelerated pace. What you see here in this graph, which is a traffic light graph, is in green, it would be increases in the percentage of consumption per capita for different kinds of animal source foods. And what you see is, for example, if you compare bovine meat or mutton, you see that in many places it's stagnating or it's relatively increasing in just a few places. But what you see for poultry meat at the end, the last column, you basically see everything in green. In the last, if you go to the last column, you see the world, 106% increase per capita consumption in the last 25 years, with some countries exhibiting enormous rates of growth. For example, you see China, when you compound that by population densities, enormous. You see Central Asia, Southeastern Asia, with so many people, more than 300%. India, 500%. So we know this is actually growing at a very accelerated rate. Now, the key is, how do we ensure that we match some sustainability standards to meet this growth? We know that the environmental performance of poultry holds its own in terms of animal source food. It's quite good. And what you see here, this is from relatively recent data from PUR and Nemetschek, where you see basically the three major production stages of different animal source foods. At some of the last columns here, hopefully you see my cursor, you can see poultry meat and eggs. And in reality, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions per se, from the production processes, what we see is that, well, these are by far the lowest of the animal source food. Compare poultry or eggs to, say, beef, and you will see that, well, we're talking about here orders of magnitude. When we look at what's needed for producing crops, for producing feed for animals, at least it's comparable to many of the other animal source foods. In many cases, because poultry will consume grains in large quantities, and we're producing a lot, well, we see here that, you know, it's a significant amount of emissions from crop production and feed transport, but, you know, in many cases, much better than the pig sector, comparable to the dairy sector and so on. In terms of land use change, we see here an important, it's one of the biggest changes in terms of cropland, simply because the demand for poultry is growing a lot. So we need to produce the feed for those, but obviously nothing in comparison to the land use change for beef production, for example. It's here a factor of 8 or something like that. So that's not bad at all. It's much better than other sources, but of course the mode of production matters tremendously. There are very significant welfare issues, especially in intensive systems. In extensive systems, you also get them associated with, you know, higher disease burdens and so on. Then there are aspects also related to large animal densities and in terms of poultry diseases, global pandemic risks, the potential for avian influenza to spread relatively quickly. We have issues around pollution. In many places still the industry is not well regulated, so the pollution through excreta of soil, water and water is very significant. Reduced air quality and a range of others, and obviously antimicrobial resistance, which is an important issue. So we need to deal with this. So how we grow poultry in the future matters a lot, how we match this demand. Now, in terms of a healthy diet, this is from the Eat Lancet, and you know, as I call, eggs are these little nutrient bombs that are fantastic for kids and for me as well, because I love eggs, and hopefully for you of you as well. Certainly, there's others that would need these eggs and poultry meat much more, especially those people in low and middle income countries. There's a need for significant increases in consumption. And what we see even in some conceptions of healthy diets from sustainable food systems, this is a graph from the Eat Lancet report. If you look at poultry, these low and middle income countries will still require a very significant increase in the consumption of poultry meat for reaching a healthy status of the population. In other places, we're probably over consuming, but I'll just focus on the key message of basically sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, the Pacific, and South Asia requiring significant consumption. Obviously, one of the things that comes to mind is the competition for land use. And this is something that we really need to take into consideration. We have a significant demand for poultry. It's mostly commercial poultry, but we need to see up to what level of intensification we take this production to ensure that we meet welfare standards and others. The demand for cereal grains will certainly increase, and this is also associated with cropland. But what can we do? How a lot of people say, well, aren't we competing directly with food for people? Yes, in some cases, yes, but you know, there's important opportunities. What about circularity? What about using, for example, some of the food waste streams to feed poultry in the future? How about adequate land use planning, where we are growing feed for poultry in low opportunity coastlands? These things need to be properly weighted as we move into the future. I certainly think that this is an area, it's one of the best animal sources of protein and micronutrients, and it will be essential for the poor as we move along into sustainable food systems. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mario. That's a really great start to today's panel. Can I just quickly ask you, do start posting your questions. There is one in already, but I'd like to ask you, Mario, you touched very briefly on animal disease. This hub, of course, is very focused on zoonotic disease. And I'm just wondering if I can ask you, in your view, how can we minimize the risk of emerging infectious diseases coming from poultry production systems? It's a big question.
Right. Well, you're giving me a question that probably a Nobel Prize would need to answer. It's a very difficult question, but at the same time, there are things that we know we need to do. One of them is certainly stopping habitat conversion. I think that many of these new viruses manifest themselves when we really encroach into natural habitats. So, you know, from a poultry perspective, I think it's essential that we really look at the where. There is a significant amount of planning on where to put poultry units, on managing bird densities spatially in the future to prevent a large possibility of a rapid spread of avian flus and things like that. We need adequate veterinary surveillance. We need trying to reduce the proximity of wild habitats and wild fowl and so on with our flocks for production and so on. And it really requires, you know, that we rethink what we want from poultry systems. I just don't see viable the super intensive systems playing a big role in the future. I think that that's something that we really need to think how we regulate better, simply for the sake of sustainability principles.
Okay,
this is important. Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. No, I'm sure we're going to get more questions on this, and clearly planning is something that's at the heart of what you're saying. Could you just take your slides down, do you think, now? Thank you very much. And you set that up very nicely for our next speaker. But before then, I think the results of the poll are in. So done. Yes. Okay. So here we are. 77%. 50% or 23%, very interesting. So our audience is split between the top and the bottom figure. So the 38% of you who voted for number 1, pat yourselves on the back, because in fact 77% of the ice-free land, according to our World in Data, is indeed used to raise livestock or to grow crops for animal feed. And the 23% figure at the bottom is the percentage of agricultural land that is currently used to raise crops for human consumption. So thank you very much. That's a really interesting split in the audience. Thanks. Okay, so I'm now going to turn over to Robyn to ask her to deliver her talk. Welcome, Robyn, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much, Fiona, and hello to you all. I hope it's okay. I've turned off my video. It makes my signal strength a little stronger coming to you via satellite internet. It's a real privilege to be part of this discussion today, and especially to do so with Mario. You'll see from my title that I think that poultry do have a role to play in our food systems, and that they can do so in a sustainable manner. However, to achieve sustainability, I believe that we are going to have to take a much more One Health approach to the food systems transformation process. Mario succinctly outlined the problems we are facing in our increasingly small planet. So far, food systems analyses have tended to focus on the food produced for and eaten by humans. Of course, that is only part of the story. And to achieve the 12th Sustainable Development Goal of responsible consumption and production, we are going to have to look at the whole picture. For example, we need to take into account the increasing numbers of companion animals and the food they eat, all the way through to issues such as how we manage our soils and the consequences of the dominance of the English language and how that influences our thinking. This discussion is focusing on poultry, widely regarded as an amazing success story, as Mario outlined, in terms of growth in production and a reduction in sale price over the past 70 years. As with most things in life, if you concentrate on quantity, then quality may take a second place. In terms of nutritional advice for people, poultry is frequently one of the meats most commonly recommended. However, the broiler bird of the 1970s, when chicken meat was recommended to reduce cardiovascular disease, has been found to be significantly different to the broiler of the 21st century. This change is reflected in current dietary messaging, suggesting that when preparing poultry, the skin should be removed and visible fat trimmed. In fact, many urban consumers, especially in high-income countries, are buying only the breast muscle. And you can see my question regarding this recommendation. In a world with increasing pressure on our natural and agricultural resources, does it make sense to raise and feed a whole bird and then only eat a portion of it? Previous question leads into how we allocate scarce food resources, or perhaps the question should be, how are we currently allocating scarce food resources, and how could we do it better? A modelling study led by the Tufts University Nutrition School tracked protein, vitamin A, iron, and zinc across a range of plant and animal source food. They studied these particular nutrients because the shortages of them have been identified as the major causes of hidden hunger or micronutrient deficiency. And these researchers used data available on the FAO website to do so. As you can read, they stated that their modelling indicated that there was no nutritional case for feeding human edible crops to animals. However, my understanding is that where animal source food is concerned, the FAO database provides information on dressed carcasses, that is, just the muscle and the bones, with offal not being taken into account. This prompts me to wonder if the results would have been the same if all edible parts had been considered. In terms of competition for scarce nutrients, of course, it's not just a battle between people and poultry for plant and animal source food. The rapid growth in aquaculture has resulted in increased competition for these same resources. And it's not just farmed animals that we should consider. With increasing urbanisation of the human population has also come a significant increase in the number of companion animals. And as cat lovers will tell you, cats are very fussy about what they eat. And that's suggested by this illustration of a popular cat food containing tender liver and chicken feast. The Tufts modelling study presented in the previous slide suggested the importance of the micronutrients iron, zinc, and vitamin A, and the macronutrient protein. As I mentioned, most information on carcass nutrients relates to the dressed carcass, where offal, such as liver, has been removed. So far, there would seem to be a lack of robust studies into the proportion of edible carcass parts entering the human food chain and the nutrients lost when those parts are not consumed. These heat maps, prepared by Hilary Chan, one of my hardworking students, looks at the distribution of key micro and macronutrients across the body of a chicken. On the left, the red in the center of the chicken is indicating that the highest concentration of iron is in the giblets, mostly in the liver in this case. From the table on the right, you can see that giblets are also high in zinc, vitamin A, and folate. These are nutrients crucial to the nutrition of children and their mothers. This table also helps to illustrate that animal source food provides many key nutrients, all in the one food. If you like, it's nature's original vitamin supplement. The other key point about this food is that it contains all of these essential nutrients in a relatively small serving. And this is important for children and for women in their third trimester when gastric volume is restricted. As we all know, competition for nutrients between people and animals is felt unequally across nations and even within households. The 2019 State of the World's Children report, published by UNICEF, highlighted that almost 60% of children worldwide are not consuming much needed nutrients from animal source food. The graphic on the left shows the percentage of children globally aged 6 to 23 months consuming the different food groups listed. And as for our fat feline here on the right reminds us, social and economic inequity is a considerable contributor to this problem. So why, you might ask, have I brought cats into this discussion? Well, it's one way of discussing why different species consume different types of food and what this means for agriculture and the environment. This table seeks to illustrate how the anatomy of the digestive system affects the type of food required to adequately nourish our bodies. I've selected sheep as an example of a herbivore, as their body weight is more or less similar to that of an adult human. One of the big differences lies in the length of the intestines, with sheep intestines being around 25 meters long and human intestines are mere 6 meters. This gives sheep an edge when it comes to absorbing nutrients and water. In the omnivore category, we see both humans and chickens. This means that we both eat a mix of plant and animal source food, but it doesn't mean that our diet should necessarily consist of the same food. If we think about the diet of the jungle fowl, from which our chickens are descended, it's very different to the average human diet. And all the way to the right is our cat, an obligate carnivore, and it needs a diet largely based on animal source food for good health. This last slide is a little busy, so sorry about that. But I wanted to be able to illustrate 3 of the different poultry production systems that are commonly practiced. Clearly, these 3 photos come from family farms and not large-scale commercial units. On the bottom left, we see many indigenous chickens scavenging for their own feed under an extensive system. This flock belonged to a community vaccinator and mixed farmer in Mozambique, who saw the number of birds increase significantly once vaccination against Newcastle disease became a regular event. These agile and smart birds eat things we'd never dream of eating, and they transform them into highly nutritious eggs and meat. In the middle is the semi-intensive systems where birds roam free for much of the day and receive supplementary feed in the compound where they roost overnight. This particular farm is a farmer-initiated cooperative in Tanzania, bringing together a number of smallholder indigenous chicken farmers who sell their eggs in nearby markets. Farm on the right is an intensive layer unit in Lao PDR. In this case, the layers are caged and eat only a prepared ration. Each of these systems are adapted to specific agroecological zones and provide an income and food and nutrition security for the households involved. For birds that are raised intensively, there is an increasing interest in identifying feed ingredients to replace corn and maize, especially those that can be produced locally, including insects. This diversity of production systems is a reminder that poultry have been part of human society for a very long time. They are amongst the earliest species domesticated by humans around 8,000 years ago, and they still play multiple roles at the household level, in addition to food and nutrition security. Poultry, especially indigenous poultry, are central to many cultural ceremonies. They are frequently the only livestock over which women have some control, and they help households to build their social capital within their communities. Finally, as we move into this new decade, there are many significant challenges ahead. It is crucial that researchers, policymakers, farmers, and other value chain actors work together to better understand and manage the unique landscapes that underpin our food systems and the health of our planet. Thanks so much for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Robyn, for that great talk. Really opens up a very broad perspective there. Can I just ask you, you talk very persuasively about the differential nutritional content of different parts of the chicken, particularly the offal, the giblets being very important. So what do you think is going to be the impact on, particularly in low and middle income countries, on household nutrition with the shift away from live birds to frozen or chilled chicken being purchased and consumed rather than the whole bird?
It's a really good question. Thanks, Fiona. I think it's something that we do need to track. I know that in some countries, such as Papua New Guinea, from commercial production units, you could buy every part of the chicken you could ever imagine in chilled form. So it is about what's being made available and what can be safely transported and stored across the different cold chains within a country. So I think muscle and bones, maybe a little less, you can store them a little longer. Some of our giblets are quite friable and need to be stored very carefully. There is, however, I think, opportunity for the private sector in countries that have problems with cold chain to think about doing other taking these giblets, the offal, and turning them into products such as powders or other forms of processed food that retain the nutrient content, but that can be transported and stored safely where cold chain can be unreliable.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, two great presentations. Already a lot of questions. Mario's been very busy answering some of those questions. For those of you in the audience, I hope you can see that there are different sections. There's open questions, there's answered questions. If you click on the answered ones, you'll see Mario's written responses. We will probably come back to some of those to have a bit of discussion in the panel. But for now, I'll pick on some of the ones. So top of the list at the moment is a question from Julie Rathall, who's saying there is some evidence from research that levels of Campylobacter in meat chickens is higher in intensively reared birds versus higher welfare systems. Surely this suggests that rearing chickens to higher welfare standards is both good for them and good for humans too. So I think you will both probably have a view on that. Mario, would you like to kick off? You're muted at the moment.
I would like to give a live thumbs up rather than just in the in the question box, because yeah, well, you know, when we get those kinds of win-win situations, then that's actually what we're looking for, to increase the sustainability of our poultry systems. Yeah, I don't have much more to add.
Okay, so you're basically saying yes and
that's
yes.
a great piece of information.
Okay, Robyn.
I think one of the important things here is that people are looking and that they are recording the production system in which they have their findings. One of the problems we face is that most of the literature, particularly regarding infectious disease and also in terms of carcass composition, comes from intensive commercial systems. And so there's an assumption that if you see this in a commercial system, that will be common across all production systems. The important thing, and what this point raises, is that you need to look at your system. You can't assume that you're going to get the same results across all different production systems. So doing the research, getting that result is great. However, I have to say that birds that are happy and have low Campylobacter out on pasture will also be more susceptible to avian influenza and some ground nematodes that poultry parasitologists haven't seen for 30 years. So it's a tricky area, and the important thing is to keep monitoring and keep that data, and to register that data by production system.
Okay, right, we're going to shift a little bit. This is coming into Robyn, but I think maybe both of you would be interested in it. So the project, the One Health Poultry Hub project has a One Health focus. So how can we use, or should we use, a One Health lens to transform food systems in a sustainable way that is good for people, poultry, in the environment? And I think that, again, I'll start with you, Robyn, I think this time.
Thanks so much. And it's lovely to have a question coming in from Vietnam. Thank you. I think the important thing is to reclaim One Health as a very broad way and a very much a systems-focused approach. We know that since the H5N1 avian influenza pandemic, One Health has often been associated with infectious disease. But in fact, infectious disease is a symptom of a deeper problem. And by taking a One Health approach where we're bringing different sectors and different disciplines together, this is what we need. I think both Mario and I have attempted to show in our presentations how complex it is, and that one size is not going to fit all, and that all sectors will need to be involved. Water, agriculture, health, transport, energy, all of these sectors have to be involved, and they have to work together with local communities to see what is going to give the best nutritional outcomes for those that need nutrients coming out of the system, but also to give those long-term sustainable results that we're all seeking so desperately.
Okay. Maybe I can add into this, Mario, because you mentioned governance a little bit. So if we're thinking about the One Health approach and also how to apply this to the mass intensified market, what do you think are the key policies, principles, and behaviours that we really need to address? So still sticking with the One Health question from Vietnam, but thinking on the policy side, maybe.
Who?
Yeah, Mario, please. Yeah.
Sorry, I lost your question. Sorry.
Okay, no, it's about the One Health approach, but I was wondering if you could come at it from the perspective of for the mass industry. You know, how does the One Health approach help us with thinking about the policies and the procedures that we need to enshrine, really, to get to this sort of sustainable place that you talked about?
Yeah, the One Health approach is certainly a more systems-based approach, taking into account the complexity and all the different dimensions of the different production systems. I think it's akin to what many of us are trying to do in sustainable food systems. It will be a central part for especially for the large producers, where the One Health approaches can be implemented at scale, that is definitely what we will have to do to ensure the sustainability. And you know, a lot of it will be about also including regulatory standards within the One Health approaches across the board. It's not only in the control of diseases, but also in the provenance of feed, provenance of the birds, the type of production system where the animals are raised, and so on. So I think that this will have to evolve over time, because the consumers in many of these places are starting to demand that that products meet certain standards in terms of the attributes that we want related to sustainability.
Okay, thank you. There's a tussle going on at the top of the poll here, and what's sitting at the top at the moment is a question from Emma Walton, which takes us in a different place. She asked, what role do workers' rights play in safe and sustainable food production? Poultry workers in poultry workers in a high intensity system will be the first to face the risks of emerging infections in usually low paid, high risk, high intensity working environments. Does prioritizing worker as well as animal welfare come into the One Health lens of sustainable food systems? And she also mentions pig farmers and Nipah, as well as chicken workers and influenza, and meat plant workers and COVID. So who'd like to go for that one first?
I'm happy to say that I think the answer is yes. A true One Health approach values all inputs. And so certainly worker rights are crucial. And I think as we hopefully move towards more circular economies, we are going to place values on this, and that value needs to be transparent. So thanks for the question.
So can I just ask as a supplement to that? I mean, I think we would all sign up to that, but what's the implications of that? Should we be paying more for our meat if you're going to protect workers' rights and pay them a decent wage?
My answer to that is everybody has the right to a decent income, and particularly taking risk into account. And I think one thing that COVID-19 has taught us, that sometimes some of our most lowly paid workers are those that in fact support all of society. People who work on farms, people who are involved with transporting food, people who pack shelves in supermarkets. These are the people who nourish society. Surely they're worth being paid a decent living.
Well said. Okay, a question here from Barbara Hessler, but I think it reflects a couple of others that Mario already commented on in the answered box. So Barbara says there are more and more plant-based products on the market that to replace chicken, and their attributes are improving. One headline recently read, plant-based chicken is exploding. So we know that KFC has got plant-based chicken on offer, and I think we also know similarly from McDonald's, etc., that we've now got plant-based burgers there. So should we be putting more emphasis on this shift and support farmers moving towards plant-based produce?
Well, I can answer that one. Thanks for the question. It's a very good one, and it will open an important debate. I think that those are very, very important options, and we should not throw them away. I think that they will have a space in certain countries and production systems. It's part of the arsenal for providing protein and providing food for humans. So I don't think that they're fully going to replace chicken meat, but certainly some of the products will have important applications in the food industry, and they should be embraced. It's part of the arsenal of things that we can do to transition to a more sustainable food system. Whether we should support farmers to moving towards plant-based produce, we should probably support farmers to move towards sustainable food systems in the ways that is feasible for them, and that will require increasing our knowledge of what are the options for farmers in specific places around the world. In some cases, it will be trying to get increased sustainability from the poultry units. In other cases, it's going to be diversification. In other cases, it will be transitions to plant-based products. So I think that we just need to keep a very open mind in this debate.
Okay, thank you. Robyn, do you want to add anything? And maybe we had a couple of questions about cell-based, lab-grown meat as well, which kind of obviously is the next follow-on, because the micronutrient content of that, it will be different.
Yes. Yes, if you insist, I will make some comments. I think people need to exercise judgment and they need to read labels. So just to say that something is plant-based doesn't necessarily make it good. Some of the plant-based products out there are in fact quite highly processed, quite nutrient poor, but energy dense. So I think you need to read. I think Mario is right that there's great potential, but you need to look at what the composition is. Is it giving you the nutrients you need, or are you just paying a lot of money to get empty calories? So read the label and then support those people that are doing the right thing by putting together a nutritious product and that are sourcing their food in a way that's sustainable and one that is not simply changing land clearing in order to feed it to pigs and poultry, but land feeding in order to have KFC vegetable nuggets.
Yeah, and you know, the context of your diet as well, because you might be getting the keys to get diversity of nutrient-rich foods in a range of ways, from plants, from animals, fruits and vegetables we know are highly deficient in our diets. So think of the diet as a whole. I think that that's important when placing these specific products in the debate.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot of questions here. And actually, I'm going to move down the list a little bit because there's a question here from Michelle Leone, which I think we haven't touched upon this area. So she says, we see from the EAT report that some regions are already over-consuming poultry products. Some should increase consumption. But how can we ensure that in increasing the consumption in areas that need to increase, that they do not overshoot and just do the same as other regions? So how do we get this balance between too little or too much?
The million-dollar question in all this debate about how to transition to a healthy, how to really deal with the demand side of food. If you think about it, we've never had to reduce voluntarily consumption of any product. Only when we've had to ration foods due to wars and a range of other things. But when we have when our income is growing and we are in peace times, we just try to eat as much animal products as we can because of a range of things, symbol of status, high nutrition, a lovely taste, and a range of others. It's one of the key things that the Eat Lancet group and a range of nutritionists are trying to deal with. What are the kinds of policy instruments that will actually stop or try to moderate the increases in demand of animal source foods? Some of the things that people have been talking about is, it's obviously education. It's some instruments around taxes, around taxes for fat and so on. They don't work very well in reality. The only taxes and incentives, say reducing the prices of certain foods, have worked for fruits and vegetables, but we still don't have a big a good arsenal of ways of dealing with this. We think that the health angle is probably going to be what sells it to people. The environmental angle, it's unlikely to sell it to people per se, but when you know that it really potentially the excessive consumption affects your health, then you personalize it, and then it has there's a greater chance that you're going to act on it on the basis of health. So look, open debate, it's totally raw and in the minds of, at the center of the World Food Summit at the moment. So not many intelligent things can be said yet about that.
Okay, thank you. I think unless you've got something very burning to add to that, Robyn, we'll move on because we've got a lot of questions left. So let me just think. There's a question here from Mike McGrew. Dr. Herrero mentioned that limiting interactions between livestock and wild animals is important for reduction in vector or disease transfer. However, this would imply that the scavenging systems noted by Professor Alders have many more interactions than intensive farming systems. So he asks, does this mean that future farming in isolated intensive animal systems is our future? Discuss. Robyn, would you like to address that?
Oh yes, I'm going to be very formal to Professor Mike McGrew. Mike, I'm just Robyn, and you know that very well. I think what is important to look at disease risk. So one of the things that has allowed infectious disease to move is the connectivity of the global poultry industry. And so while well-managed and well-functioning intensive commercial units may have low disease risk once disease enters, because of the rate of spread and because of the connectivity within the industry, it becomes a huge risk. In terms of scavenging systems, the movement and the connectivity within that system is a little less. So I know that during the H5N1 pandemic that village and free-range poultry got quite a bit of bad press. When the epidemiological studies were done and dusted, generally the finding was that the major contributors to the spread of H5N1 was the intensive industry rather than the indigenous system. So there's no perfect system. The important thing is to do our best to keep all birds healthy such that when they become sick, farmers want to report and we get to do something about it. So I'm having a bet each way there. I can't see either system disappearing anytime soon. Thanks for your question, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Robyn. I'm going to go to a question from Ethiopia, from Tadios Habte Tekelmariam. Apologies if I've mangled your name. Who says, I'm from Ethiopia and the experience I have here with the increased flock dynamics is not highly appreciated by farmers due to the high price of feed ingredients. They want to fix the number of flocks they raise to something between 10 to 15 birds, I guess that is, which they can supplement easily. What kind of alternative feed resources can we use to fulfill high demand for feed in an increased flock structure? So there were a couple of questions earlier about insect feed and various things like this, but that was for humans actually, not for chickens. So any thoughts about sustainable fodder or feed for chickens in these situations?
Robyn's probably the master for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes, certainly what we know that in the intensive poultry industry, 70% of the cost is feed. So if you can get your feed problem fixed, you've got everything fixed. So we understand your wish to look at alternative feed sources. There certainly are a number of manuals out there that give you alternatives. I think also there's a good example of a poultry model that's been developed in Cambodia that uses a little bit of commercial feed, but 70% locally produced supplementary feed. And that has really reduced overall expenses but delivered a bird that's reaching market at a good weight and in a quality that's appreciated by the consumers. So I think there's certainly, if you want to contact us afterwards, we can certainly share manuals. The FAO, IFAD, a whole range of NGOs have published on this topic. But if you can get in and work with your farmers and work through and see what alternative locally produced feed supplements are going to work well under your systems, then that would be fabulous. I may not have answered your question, but please reach out via email afterwards if you'd like to follow up. Thanks.
And just to supplement that, someone on the tech team, Dan on the tech team, is just he's going to go and look for those manuals that you mentioned, and we'll put them on the Slack channel so that people can access those directly there. So
yes,
you're interested in this topic, go to our Slack channel and we'll try and provide the resources there that you can have a look at. Okay, we're getting to the point where we're almost running out of time, but I want to try and fit a couple more in. There's a couple of questions about climate, one from Barbara Hessler, one from Jane Gibbons. So Jane asks, what about the climate change impacts of clearing land, so Amazon rainforest for soya production, for example? How can consumers choose to consume poultry that has not contributed to this impact? And meanwhile, Barbara is asking about the metrics, really. So GHG emission comparisons are commonly expressed by quantity of product or quantity of protein, and it differs across species depending on the denominator that's used. And she's saying she'd welcome a more diverse set of denominators, but appreciate it would be complicated to the narrative. What do you think? So these are both questions related to the environmental impact of the different species, so, and the impact of the, so yeah. Can we wrap that up, Mario?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. In case of the Amazon rainforest, there's a lot of work at the moment on certification of rainforest-free soybean production, and in fact, the European Union is now going for a soybean Amazon-free label. So look, this is actually coming. This is we see it here also in Australia, a range of other places that people are very much interested in the provenance of the feed sources and also of the animals. So increased traceability, I see it happening. Increased labeling as well. For Europeans, which import most of the soybean from Brazil, this is a big thing, and if I understand correctly, the new trade agreements are also trying to ensure that the soybean that gets to Brazil is Amazon free. So there you have it. And in terms of the metrics, yes, we've tried all sorts of different metrics, many different denominators, and it is something that we tried in. It's less important for the comparison of animal source foods, but when we've done comparisons with the croplands, we at the beginning thought, well, we need to do it on the basis of protein or on the basis of B12 or vitamin A and yes, we do see important differences, but when you start really looking at the volumes of production of many of these things, ultimately the volumes prevail over the metric that you end up using. They're still important, and you could use them for certain applications. It really depends what you're trying to achieve with your choice of metrics. If you're in a diet that is deficient of a certain specific component, you might want to choose that other metric. But yeah, as these things are being tried by the life cycle community.
Okay, thank you. So there's some really useful comments actually in the Q&A that I'm sure the audience are looking at. People putting in comments about education and about the workers' rights, etc. There's just one final question that I would quite like to put to you, and this is really asking. It's from Julia Lee, and it's asking, how can we communicate the big issues, i.e. the One Health, climate change, welfare, etc., with people in low and middle income countries who may prioritize their immediate needs for people, for financial outcomes, antibiotic usage, etc. So how do we square that circle? Just as a final set of thoughts for One Health. Robyn.
Well, I'll make a short answer so Mario also has a chance. I think people, certainly smallholder farmers in low-income countries already know about climate change. They're living with it. So what they need is, Mario used the term win-win, solutions, approaches that are going to help them meet needs today and also become more resilient to those increasing future challenges. But yes, certainly it requires a nuanced approach. And given that most low-income countries are not really responsible for driving climate change, I guess what they'd like to hear is that high-income countries are actually taking the response seriously. Mario.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I have a short answer to this. How do you communicate them? You communicate them with transparency, with the simplicity that the audience you're dealing with requires, and with a strong sense of place. You know what really matters to the local people that you're actually talking. It's very difficult to communicate things if you just leave them at the global level, because people don't really get to really relate to them. And that's the other thing, you know, it's really trying to put things in the perspective of what's in it for me, what's in it for that particular stakeholder. It's really essential to bring it to some level of the lived experience, or to make people truly aware of what things mean to them. We've been trying. Look, I work on global change issues, and it is incredibly difficult to distill the big messages, especially when you go to places that I work all a long time, to Tanzania, or to places where, you know, the realities are completely different. And we also need to accept, you know, that although we are, as Robyn says, although we are all, we need to put our grain of salt to deal with climate change, you know, in many cases, like for many of those Tanzanian farmers, yeah, they shouldn't be trying to adjust their systems for the sake of climate change. They have more pressing problems.
Okay, thank you very much. This has just been a fabulous discussion. Thank you so much. We now have to finish our session. So thank you so much to our expert panelists who highlighted all of these issues. And I think we've got a slide of key messages that's going to come up. Just we don't need to talk through it, but these are the key messages that came across from the two talks. We will post this onto Slack, but I think the discussion has really highlighted all of these from Mario's talk, that the phenomenally fast rates, that poultry is doing pretty well with the emissions compared to other sources, but we need increased and well-regulated systems. And then from Robyn, the nuanced approach, looking at the need for sustainable diets and need for data, and the strong message about the micronutrients, and also the roles that poultry play in addition to food and nutrition security. So for you in the audience, we'd really like your perspectives following the discussion. So we have another poll. Do please, can you share your feedback? So we're asking after the discussion, which of these do you think is the most important for food security for people? And so please just read through that and tick the box that you think is most appropriate. Okay, so I would finally once again like to thank our panelists, Robyn, Alders and Mario Herrero, for the presentations and discussions. I want to thank the tech team working in the background to make sure everything runs smoothly, and also to you, the audience, particularly for all the wonderful questions and for your interest. Do carry the discussion on the Slack channel, and you can access this via the website or via the link that you've got in your invitation whenever you have time. That would be wonderful. The next event in the series is in 2 weeks' time, which will be on governance, behaviour and blame, specifically antimicrobial resistance policy, and we have two excellent panelists who will be presenting to that. And I think, I'm not sure, have we got a result from the poll? It's a bit quick. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. There we are. Okay. Okay. Interesting. So there's a really good consensus in the virtual room that we can't just focus on one of those priorities. We have to work on all of these targets equally. So I think that definitely sounds like a yes to the One Health approach. So that's really good. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Keep safe, and I hope we'll see you all in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks very much.